Hey everyone, I'm Mitch. I'm one of the pastors here, and you're watching another episode of Suncrest on Demand. Let's get going.
How are we doing, everybody? Great. It's good to be with you tonight. Hey, I know we have a lot of guests in the room because of these parent-child dedications. I just want you to know, if this isn't your church home normally, we are really, really glad you're here. It's part of our aim to make sure you feel welcome here, you understand what's going on. And I just want you to know, no matter what your faith background is, faith or not, church or not, you are welcome here. In fact, I'd really encourage you, if this is a meaningful experience in any way, just to say, hey, I'd keep coming back to that place for a few weeks to see if that's a place that could be meaningful in my life and my family's life. You are welcome here. You know, it wasn't that long ago when Jenny and I, my wife and I, were dedicating our last child. He's 5 years old now, but we stood up here just as these families were. And I was thinking about it today, knowing we were going to have the dedications, and thinking, like, just last night, I was praying with Davion as he was going to bed, and, you know, I got to hear his prayers, right? And like, it's just the most sincere prayers from a 5-year-old. He's been saying, God, I've been making some bad choices, and I need your help to do better tomorrow. And then he goes like, help me, help me, help me. And I'm like, this is perfect, right? And honestly, then I pray after he prays, and I'm like, that was a better prayer than I was going to pray, right? Right? It's actually the same prayer that I need to pray. And then I let him lead me. And I walk out of his room and I see the photo and the thing that Jenny and I wrote to him and for him from the dedication. And it's just like, this really, really matters. And maybe more than anything else, especially to the parents who are here, I said this before, but this church has your back. We will walk with you. We have so many volunteers. Our staff for kids is amazing. And the financial generosity from this church to make all that possible, it's amazing. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm going to teach from a passage in Romans chapter 8 today. It's the last section. I'll give you a little context. We've been working through that. But there is one word in this passage that I'm going to teach about that is, without a doubt, the most important word, the most consequential word in the passage. It is a very small word. It's only 3 letters long, but it might also be one of the most consequential words in your life. Let me explain a little bit. The word is simple. It is the word for. F-O-R. For. And let me just ask you 2 questions about that. The first question is this: who are you for? Who are you for? Now, I know some of the people in the room, maybe guys in particular, like, you thought sports teams. That's the immediate place where it went, wasn't it? It's like, well, I'm for Purdue, right? Well, that's because you're smart. Some of you are like, I'm for the Cubs. And I'm like, well, that's because you're dumb. So I don't mean to insult you, especially if it's your first time here, but it's just the way I see the world, okay? So our sports teams, like, there's some loyalty to that. We'll cheer them on. We're in their corner. We even kind of make fun of fair weather fans. Like, to be for something really matters. Like, you have their back, right? But sports teams, I mean, that's kind of surface level, right? One of the things we say at Suncrest is that we are for the region, for the region. And this is a big deal to us for a number of reasons. First of all, I learned a long time ago that a lot of people's perception of church is that the church is known for being against things rather than for things. And I'm like, that's terrible. That wasn't what Jesus was. So why would the church be that way? We should be known for what we're for. And among many other things, actually, we are for Northwest Indiana. The scriptures lead us to really care about the place that we live and invest ourselves there. And I mean, we put our money where our mouth is. Over the last 4 years, we put more than $1 million into meeting needs in Northwest Indiana. We built volunteer teams that serve every week with all of our compassion partners. It's amazing to me. And if you know me, you probably know that I am a lifelong advocate for Northwest Indiana. It's like my mission, one of my missions in life, to help everyone in Northwest Indiana who is sometimes down on the region to actually be for the region, To lose our sense of, our insecurities and say, no, this is a great place and God is doing things here. But even that church being for something or for a region, it doesn't quite yet zero in on, I think, the power of this word for. And maybe when I asked you who you are for, it was someone's face that came to mind. You're for your kids. You're for your spouse. And they know it, right? Like they know you have their back. They know in any circumstance, everyone else might leave them, but you're standing there. You're the encourager in their life. You're the one who's pushing them forward. You're going to make investments and sacrifices for the sake of them. You are for them. And man, when you have somebody's back, I think it's one of the most Jesus-like things that you can do is to say, you know what? I am for you. And this is powerful, right? Because when we get this right in someone's life, we of course understand nobody's perfect. Everyone has places to grow. And when you have truly established yourself as being for someone, then you actually get the chance to walk into their life, note some things that are off, and encourage them to grow or make a change. If you aren't for them, that feels judgmental. But if you have established that I'm for you, then it feels helpful and it feels like love that someone would speak up to me because I know they're for me. That's a really, really big deal. Let me ask the second question. This is the flip side of the question, and it is much more sensitive, I think. Who is for you? Who is it? Like what names and faces came to mind? Like I'm seeing some things. I'm standing up front, so I'm watching you, right? And a few of you just reached over and grabbed someone's hand. I'm like, that's awesome. That's awesome. And of course, there's sadness in the room right now because there are some people in this room, maybe you, who feel like, I don't know. I don't know anybody who's really for me. If the definition, Greg, is they have my back, they sacrifice for me, they encourage me, they would stand with me in a tough time. I would know if they come to me with a critique that it's coming out of love, not out of judgmental. I don't know, Greg, if anyone is for me. And this is such a significant thing, especially as it relates to the scriptures. I mean, back in April, I did this series, like the kids in our lives, and I'm mostly teaching us to be for the kids in our lives. And on Mother's Day weekend, I did the women in our lives, and I particularly was teaching to men about men. Guys, make sure you are for the women in your lives. And next weekend is Father's Day, and I'm going to teach with a little bit of help about the men in our lives. And it's mostly going to be for women to make sure you have their back. You're encouraging to them. You're supporting them. Like, this really matters to know that somebody is for you. That's how powerful this is. So we'll get to that word in the midst of this passage. Let me set a little context. First, as I've been doing for the last 3 weeks, Romans chapter 8, where we're living, has kind of highlighted 3 important theological concepts: justification, sanctification, and glorification. I know these are big words. They might sound theological or big Bible words. They're not complicated. Justification is the moment when you surrender your life to Christ, if you have, and you became justified before God. You cannot justify yourself before God just by your actions. I mean, it's almost silly to think about if you stop and think, like, that's how I'm going to justify myself. It's not through that. It's through surrendering yourself to Christ. And the surrender is really saying, Christ, I want to be like you. I want to be conformed to the likeness of Christ. And it's not easy, but it is a single decision. It is a moment in time. And for all of us who have surrendered our lives to Christ, like, it shaped us. There is then sanctification. Sanctification is the whole process from after you've surrendered your life to Christ to when you die. And glorification happens when you die, where you get a new body, you get a resurrected body, you pass the test of the judgment day, and you are in heaven. It's a beautiful thing. Glorification happens in a moment. Justification happens in a moment. Sanctification happens in a process. And oftentimes, this process that, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, that we're walking through, there's highs and lows, but it's actually often in the lows that our life gets reshaped to be more like Christ. Last week I mentioned this. So this is a great question as you're analyzing anything you're facing, really. Is this a problem to solve? Or is this a tension to manage? And if you can look at whatever situation you're facing as a parent or in your job, whatever it is, if you could say, oh, this is a problem that can be solved, I should solve it, then you will escape from the tyranny of just managing something that could be solved. But if you're like, no, this can't be solved, this is going to be an ongoing tension in life, that's the way it is. And if I try to solve it, I'm just going to drive myself nuts because it's unsolvable. There are problems to solve in life, and there are tensions to manage in life. Justification and glorification were problems to solve, and sanctification is a tension to manage. Now, every parent, we're on dedication weekend here, right? So every parent probably can think about this. Like, there are so many things when you're raising kids, especially really young kids, that can be so tiring because you're constantly managing them. And one of the examples I use with people is to say, hey, you're probably supposing more things are tension to manage when you could just solve them. And then I always ask young parents, I'm like, do you let your child decide whether they get in a car seat or not? And all the parents are like, no, I wouldn't let the child decide that. I'm like, that's right, because that's just a problem to solve. Whether the child wants to or not, the child is going to get in the car seat. But there are many other examples as you're raising kids where you're like, you actually should treat it like a car seat. You should just say, hey, I'm the parent. This is the way it is. It's going to be better for you and better for me. We're not going to negotiate this. So sorting this out is a big deal. But here's a new question for this week on the context. Who are you? And who do you let define you? This, of course, is an identity question. Who are you? And I added the second question because I think it's how most people figure out who they are. There's a voice from somewhere in their life, and that voice defines who they are. And you and I get to choose which voices get to define who we are. This is a middle school and high school thing. I love having middle school and high schoolers in the room, but it's not just a middle school, high school thing. Many adults are still trying to figure out, who am I? And when you start to think about the voices that are in our lives that speak to this, I mean, sometimes we let other people define us. Their voices, what they said about us, what they think about us, that's what defines us. You can probably all pretty quickly say, well, that's not a good idea. Of course it's not a good idea. But it is a real temptation in our lives to let other people tell us who we are. Sometimes we say, no, I define myself. I define myself. I'm the one who says who I am. And at first blush, that might seem like a very intelligent way to approach this. And yet, if there is a God, and I believe there is, and that God knows you better than you know you, that you and I could acknowledge we've been misled about ourselves before. I've had a misunderstanding of who I am, not an understanding of who I am. But if God says something about who I am, I'm going to let that voice, the one who created me, define me, rather than others' voices or even my own journey. And that, with that context, let me walk into today's passage. It's really shaped by 6 questions from Romans chapter 8, verse 31 through Romans chapter 8, verse 39. This is the first of the questions. What then shall we say in response to these things? It's just an introductory question. And it's mostly a forward-looking question. What should we say? How should we move forward? It's a hinge kind of question. And the next 5 questions that are going to come are to help us move forward. But it is built on something else. What shall we say in response to these things? So if we could, just for a moment, let me review what these things were. What did we talk about last week? Well, at the end of the passage, it was Romans 8:28 that says, for in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And we talked about how many times we misinterpret the word good. We think good means comfortable. We think good means ease. We think good means healing. Good means nice. But the definition of good is given to us in the passage. It's actually the same definition that happened when I surrendered my life to Christ. It is, I want to be conformed to be like your son, and that's what good is. And the promise of God for those of us who are followers of Jesus is that he's working all things, the highs in your life, the lows in your life, the suffering, the trials, the hardships. He is working them. His force is being used to make you more like his son. It's so powerful Because while, of course, there's an instinct inside of us to want comfort, to want ease, to want relief, isn't it better that we get strength and we get grit and we get resilience and something builds out into us that makes us like his son? Now, after that passage, right before this question, it goes into a little diatribe that talks about what God foreknew and what he predestined and who he chose and who he called and who he justified. And you may have noticed I kind of skipped over that part last week. It is a big question for people who ask theological questions like, Greg, how does this all fit together? Is God, well, this is the question. Does God choose me or do I choose him? Now, this is a great question. And actually, just so you know, the weekend after Father's Day, I'm going to come back to Romans chapter 9 through 11, and it gets at this question. But in as short a version as I can, let me answer this question for you today. Does God choose me or do I choose him? Yes, is the answer to that question. This is a tension to be managed. And the moment you think it's a problem to be solved, that either it's all God or it's all you, the only people I know who are misteaching this are the people who live entirely on one of those edges. If the question is, did I get drafted or did I volunteer? The answer is, yeah, that's two sides. God is actually calling, he's drafting all of us. He's chosen you, and then you have a response part to it. Sometimes we call it voluntold. But we'll resolve that tension in a couple of weeks. So let's get to the next questions about what we should say then in response to all this. If God is for us, who can be against us? Now, there's 4 more questions coming after this, but this is the umbrella question to the 4 that are coming. They'll all kind of explain and support the answer to this question. These are rhetorical questions. He's not expecting you to answer them, and you don't need to answer them for me right now. These are questions designed to make you think, and he's absolutely building a case that says, if these things are true, then you figure out where the logical implications go. And he begins by making the case that God is for you. Now, that's very significant in your identity, because many, many people that I talk to, I clearly get the sense that they think God's probably against them. God's probably mad. You definitely messed up sometime in the past, and he would love to zap you for it. You don't live up to his expectations, and you've been in settings where you didn't live up to expectations before. You got fired, your parents were mad, so God's probably against you. And I think that's the setting Paul was writing this into. He's like, whoa. Let me clarify this. Even if nobody else is for you, God is for you. Now, I want to explain this just a little bit because this is a big deal. And I understand there's people in different places in your faith journey sitting here listening to this passage from Romans. You might be a person who doesn't even believe in God. You might be an atheist or have some sort of way that you see the world, and you have essentially determined that God isn't real, or at least the God of the Scriptures isn't real. If that's you, I'm thrilled that you're here. It might sound odd to you, but one of the designs of our church is that even people who don't believe in God, people who might even be opposed to God, you are welcome here, and we're grateful for the journey. I don't hide my ambitions. I do hope to persuade you that God is real, if you're even open to that persuasion. I would have coffee with you to talk about those things. That's the orientation of our church, but God is for. This orientation of being for means he has your back, that he would make sacrifices for you, which he has demonstrated, that he doesn't think you're perfect, and he actually will ask you to change. He will correct you, but when he comes to correct you, the idea that he's been so for you so much means it's not judgmental. He loves me. Thank God he would come and set me on the right course. Actually, in Romans, this is so fascinating. Before we got to this place in Romans has already taught us that in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, people mostly tried to get an understanding of God based on the law. There were a lot of rules. The rules were supposed to point you to who God is. And essentially earlier in Romans it said, and that didn't work People started to reduce God just to rules, and God is not just rules. So God sent Jesus into the world. And who is Jesus? Jesus is the representation of God. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is God. And when Jesus came into the world, the whole reason he came into the world is that so now we'd understand who God actually is. He's not a rules-based God. He's a person who loves us, teaches us, has our back, corrects us, and ultimately will give his whole life for you. He is for us. But maybe it's that third little word, God for us, that's the most difficult. Because that makes it personal. I mean, God is for you individually. And the question is asked, if God is for us, who can be against us? And there are plenty of things that are against us, plenty of people who are against us in this world. And you may feel right now like your life is defined by what you're going through, by what's against you. You might feel like I'm trying to climb out of a pit financially, but I don't know if I'm going to make it. You might feel like my anxiety and my depression is off the charts and my mind, it just keeps churning. You might think you're defined by something you did in your past, which was horrible. But you are not your situation. You are not your last sin. You are not your confusion, and you're not your financial situation. It is true that there are things that are against you, but this is the context. But God is for you. And all of those things, if you'll let God have his way with you, can be reordered and reset so they don't dominate you. God is for you. The passage goes on. It says, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Got another question. I know there's a lot of words in here, but it's not complicated. The whole idea is God gave his son, Jesus, for you. And his son, along with the Father, wants to graciously give you all things. That's how valuable you are to him. He's for you. You know, it's funny to try to set prices on certain things, and you've probably known people, or maybe you have been a person who had a price on something that was like way out of whack. You either set the price way too high. I mean, you run into people like this, right? They're like, oh, I think my car would sell for, and you're like, no, it's not going to do that. I mean, you can try, but the market decides the price. I have a friend who says it's the eBay principle. Whatever you have is worth exactly what someone will pay for it. That's how much it's worth. It's a fair principle and an important one in light of this. Because your value is determined by what the Father, God himself, would be willing to pay for you. And we could ask this question ourselves. I ask it from time to time. You've heard me ask it if you've been around. I don't know. Who in your life is worth your life? Who would you die for? I know this is a big question of life, and most of us try to skirt past this, but I like trying to force myself and force you to ask the big questions of life, because this gets at love. Like, make a list. Who would you give your own life for? I can tell you my list, right? And sadly, most of you aren't on it. Just being straightforward with you, okay? So, my wife is on it. I got 4 kids. They're all on it. My mom is on it, and maybe my mother-in-law. No, I'm just, sorry, Susie. Hope you're watching online. It's a short list, but my life's, if I lose my life, it's a big deal. I would trade my life for those people. You could ask a little different question. Actually, this is the question that's reflected here. Greg, who would you let your son die for? And pretty much that shrinks to 0. What I'm saying to you is I don't love anyone enough that I would give my son's life for them. Nobody is that valuable to me. But God did not spare the life of his own son. That's how valuable you are to him. He is for you. And I never want anyone to walk out of this church thinking anything different. The next passage has two questions. Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. And then a similar question. Who then is the one who condemns? And the answer to this one is no one. Now, this is very important. You might think your standing before God is that you're condemned, that he is against you. But there's no one to bring any charges against the ones God has chosen. It is him who brings justification. It is him who justifies you. And maybe this is one way for you to think about it. In justification, it is just as if you've never rebelled. That's how God sees you. You brought yourself in under the sacrifice of his son. You yielded to who he is and his way in this world. You received the fullness of his grace and his forgiveness. And it is justification. It is just as if you never rebelled. That's how God sees you. So, who would be condemned? And the answer to that is no one who has placed themselves under Christ. What did Romans 8:1 tell us? There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And we get to live with that posture, knowing that God is for us, that there is no condemnation. Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. What's going on? This is so powerful. In the end, according to the scriptures, and I believe this, I hope that you do too. In the end, God will judge the world. But the one who's sitting in the judgment seat is actually Jesus. It's not the Father. And so the very one who is going to judge you is the same one who interceded for you. He's the same one who gave his life for you. It's all one and the same. What's his answer going to be? He is not going to go through a list of all the things you've done right and all the things you've done wrong. That is not what happens on the judgment day. He is going to say, I called them. Did they respond? Did they yield their life to me? I went to the greatest lengths I knew to show them how much I loved them. Did they respond? Did they bring themselves under my lordship? And if the answer to that's yes, if you are justified, you will be glorified. It gets at the question, who are you? And who do you let define you? See, this is so important. Because at the level of our identity right now, there are no doubt people in this room who are letting other human beings define you. There's no doubt that in this room right now, in your understanding of who you are, your identity, you are letting your worst choices define you. You are letting the divorce that you went through define you. You are letting the embarrassing situation that you're hiding from everyone else and they don't know, but you know, define you. But you are not your situation. And you are not your temptation. You actually aren't all of your athletic abilities, your IQ, or anything else. Man, if I could put my hands on your shoulders and look you in the eye, I'd say, you are who God says you are. He's the one who created you. He knows you better than you know you. And according to him, he is for you, you are valued, and there is no condemnation if you have yielded your life to him. The passage goes on. So what shall separate us from the love of Christ? That's a great question. Because I don't know if you feel like there's any gap, any separation between you and the love of God. But his answer here is going to be nothing separates you from the love of God. One of the ways I say this that I think is a little shocking to people, and I guess I want it to be shocking, is that you know, for every person in this room, there's nothing you can do to make God love you more. You know that, right? Like, I want you to respond to his love by doing good things, by being generous, by making a difference in the world, by investing yourself in other people, being for. I want you to do that, but doing good things, there's nothing you can do that would make God love you anymore. And, maybe more important, there is nothing you can do that would make God love you any less. There's nothing you have done. There's nothing you will do. There's nothing you could do. God's crazy about you. He is for you to the degree that he would give his son for you. What could separate you from the love of Christ? I don't know. Could trouble? Could hardship? Maybe you've had those things happen in your life. Last weekend, we talked about 5 different stories of our church of people who were walking through real trouble. It did not separate them from the love of Christ. It actually, many times, drew them in to the love of Christ. Does persecution? Maybe you're trying to stand up for your faith. Maybe you're not willing to give in on something that's important to you, and you're not being a jerk about it. You're not one of the people on Facebook ranting about it. That's not who you are. But you're just standing firm in your convictions with kind of a beautiful, healthy, quiet conviction. But you take heat from other people for it. Does that separate you from the love of Christ? Does famine or nakedness, the idea that your circumstances have fallen apart around you, the idea that you're in that deep financial hole or you don't have anything to eat when you go home tonight, does that separate you from the love of Christ? Does danger, our greatest fears in this world, or the sword? No. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And I am asking you to step into the actual identity of who you are. That phrase, more than conquerors, oh my goodness, what a phrase. It's not just conquerors. It's not just like, well, I beat the famine. I beat the persecution. I beat the hardship. It's not conquerors. It's more than conquerors. And I don't know if you've noticed this. Maybe you have in the work of God in your life if you'd pay attention to it. That so often he takes the very things that are trying to take us down and he doesn't just let us beat them. He subjugates those very things so that they become tools for us to become stronger, to become more like him, to be conformed to the image of his son. The very persecution that you've gone through, the very trials or hardships, the danger that you faced, you didn't just get through it, it made you stronger because we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels or demons, neither present or the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Here's the point. God is for you. Don't believe any other lies. Don't arrange your life and your decisions and your dreams based on anything else. God is for you. Friends, I got to tell you, like in my life, this has been the freedom that has opened up so much of the world to me that I didn't have to live in fear. I didn't have to wonder that God was maybe against me, that it wouldn't work out. Like it doesn't always work out, but what I do know is that God is for me. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit of my own story because I want you to see this in the same way. Like, I can go back to high school. I played on our high school basketball team. My faith was becoming very serious to me, and it meant I did not participate in some of the things the other guys were doing. And I heard about it. And I'm like, I don't really like feeling bad. I don't really like feeling left out. But I can feel left out as long as I know that God is for me. And there was a time later on, I hadn't even gone to college yet, when my sense was, Greg, you should be a pastor. And nobody in my family is a pastor. Like, I don't have any context for this. The only context I had for it was the church I grew up in, and the church I grew up in treated their pastor like trash. And I thought when I was saying yes to that I'm signing up for a life of misery. I'm probably going to get paid nothing, live in the middle of nowhere, have a small church where people are angry at me most of the time. Like, not a fun life. But this is the point. But I knew God was for me. So you can say yes to that. I go to college. I know this is weird and maybe not relatable to all of you, but I was 19 years old, and someone asked me, Greg, would you start preaching every weekend at a little church nearby the college I went to? I hadn't even taken a preaching class. And I said yes. Why would I say yes? I'll tell you why. Because God's for me. And if God is for me, who can be against me? Did they hear some terrible sermons? Yes, they did. But it conformed me to the likeness of his son, and it made me trust him in a way that I wouldn't have had to trust him otherwise. And it embedded in me some things that I was going to need as an investment for later in my life. And I find people saying no to things all the time. They say no out of fear. No, I couldn't tackle that. No, that's too big. No, that's a situation. 28 years ago, I was finishing my senior year of college. And a guy says, hey, Greg, you want to work at this little new church called Suncrest? Meets at a high school in St. John, Indiana. And I'm like, not really. And then he said, but wait. They also won't pay you. At least not a full salary. And eventually I'm like, okay. Why? Why? This is the why. Because God is for me. And you make different decisions. When your identity is that I'm loved by God, there's nothing I can do that's going to make him love me less, nothing I can do that make him love me more. He is for me. He loves me so much that he sent his own son for me. Like, why wouldn't I do that? If I have any inkling that God might be leading me to this. I don't know. Jenny comes home. Greg, you want to be foster parents? Nope. Then we became foster parents. When I felt ill-equipped, unprepared, like the sacrifice was going to be too much. And I can tell you, in every one of those stories I told you, and many, many more, that not only did God bring me through the difficulty, he took those situations and he subjugated the very things I was a little bit afraid of, and he used them in my life to make something beautiful. And I'm just telling you, you will live a different life if you know that God is for you. And I pray that you do. His plans for you are good. Not easy, not simple, not without hardship, not without famine, but his plans are good for you.
If you want to learn about all the amazing things going on around here at Suncrest, you can always either download the Suncrest app, which has great tools. It has Bible reading plans, a history of messages, and so much more for you to get plugged into. Or you can head to suncrest.org/top4 to see what we believe would be the top 4 things you should know if you're looking to take steps in your journey on your faith and your journey with Suncrest. So, if you're looking to get plugged in, go ahead and download the Suncrest app or head to suncrest.org/top4.
Darkness run for cover, but the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. I believe in signs and wonders. I have resurrection power. Still the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. Oh, my place belongs to you forever. testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Oh, our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. If I'm not dead, you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'm justified. This is my testimony. Oh, I'm alive. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify by Jesus Christ the righteous. I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony.
Every week, we pause everything we do, both in person and on demand, to focus on the love of Jesus during a time we call communion. It's where those of us who follow Jesus take bread and juice that represents His body and His blood broken and poured out for us so that we might know what real love and life can look like. It's a moment to realign, refuel, and refocus us on Jesus, His love, how it changes us, and how it can fuel us to change the world. If you're watching this and you wouldn't define yourself as someone who follows Jesus, you're just exploring what it would even look like, I'm glad you're watching, because Suncrest is an amazing and a safe environment for you to ask all of your questions about what it would look like for you to be on a faith journey of your own alongside lots of other people on the same journey as you. I'm going to put a timer, some scripture on the screen here shortly, and I want to invite you to eat, drink, and reflect when you're ready. If you liked this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you know someone who needs to hear it, hit the share button. And if you want to see more content like this from Suncrest Church, go ahead and hit subscribe on our YouTube channel. I hope you join us next week as we continue another episode of Suncrest On Demand. And until then, I hope you experience change that only comes from following Jesus. Bye now.